All right. So, tell me about what you got on the savings drive behind this time. Anything about it?
I have a sillier question of politics. Another satirical war movie last night, and they used the word foobar in it as well. And they just said that it was a German word. So what does it mean? I'm assuming it's
an acronym, and it means fucked up beyond all recognition.
Oh,
And it was an actual acronym coined by GIs in World War II. They would just, oh, this is foobar. You know, anything that was just a complete disaster is foobar. So
what's it? I quite like the little girl who slapped her father. I thought that was
yeah, I really like that point where she just starts slapping her dad. Why would you do that to me?
What does it sound for exactly?
Fucked up beyond all recognition.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, what I was gonna say is, so why was that family still there? Like, it seems like if there were
The fighting overtook them.
to leave, they would have.
Well, I mean, the thing is, nobody had any idea when D-Day was going to happen. I mean, just a tiny little digression. When they were planning that invasion, they didn't know when the weather was going to be good enough, and so they just said, we'll go on D-Day at H hour, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then they planned everything after that, saying on D+1 day, we'll do this, and on D+2 day, we'll do this. And so that way they could have the whole plan laid out, and they didn't know when the actual date was. And in fact, it was supposed to be June 5th, but the weather was bad, so Eisenhower called it off for 24 hours, and they went on June 6th. It goes down as D-Day. I mean, it's a dumb reason, but I say all this because nobody, the Germans, the Americans, the French, etc., knew exactly what day that was going to happen. And so when it did happen, those people who were probably within 5 miles of the coast had no idea they were suddenly going to be in a war zone. There was no evacuation order. There was nothing like that. And so lots of people got caught. And, you know, they might have just all stayed in their houses, except if their house gets hit by a howitzer or something, half of it's gone. And that's what I'm guessing they were trying to portray there, is that this family had gotten caught, suddenly found themselves in a war zone, completely didn't mean to, but there they were. Right. Exactly.
Depictions of masculinity are a little different in this movie compared
Yes.
to what we see in the other films. Men are allowed to be a lot more emotional, and instead of commenting on it or correcting the behavior, they just let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And Jackson pointed out that every man has a chip in his masculinity at some point. Some of them, for example, the main guy, the captain, he has the shaking hand, which everybody comments on.
Yeah.
And then you had Vin Diesel, who was super macho until it came to a little girl, and then he was like,
reminded him
"Oh,
of
I'm
it,
gonna take care of her." But they all have chips in their masculinity, and I think that's interesting to look at.
Okay.
I mean, I think the line he said that it's the decent thing to do, I think is going to have a lot. I feel like that was a very poignant line that I'm sure they're definitely going to come back to at some point, just because of what that means.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Jackson was saying yesterday about, like, the movie does not feel like it's taking place during World War II. It feels like a 90s. Like, it feels like it's in the 90s. It feels
Well,
like
it is the 90s, so there's a good reason for that.
Yeah, it feels so present. Like, I don't know, and I struggled with that All Quiet on the Western Front too. I was like, oh wait, they're German.
Yeah.
Like, because they were just like all so American, it felt.
Well, I mean, All Quiet on the Western Front was, I should point out, an English film based on a German novel. So all those actors were English, the director was English, it was all English.
Yeah.
It was not German. I want you to pay attention to, I mean, Zach mentioned sort of a chip in everybody's masculinity. I'm going to phrase it slightly differently. I want you to watch for the rest of the movie. Who gets punished for showing sentiment or emotion? We've seen one. Vin Diesel has a soft spot for the little girl and gets killed. Let's keep looking. Now, I also point out though that each one of them clearly the movie does a good job that these guys are real people in the sense that they have real emotions, they have attachments, they have, etc. And the guy crying over he thought his brother was dead, turns out he's in elementary school, and but everyone just sort of accepted that. And so it really does say, yes, men are entitled to the full panoply of emotions here. And there's a lot of sentimental points in the movie where people are talking about, home or what have you, or their mothers, but the movie has a subtle message about what you do with that, right? And I think we see a little bit of that. Vin Diesel lets it get away from him, and he's killed, right? So keep an eye on that. Any other thoughts or any scenes that struck you, or?
Something that's interesting is I haven't really seen a moment where the captain is just flat out wrong. Because he was telling Vin Diesel to put the girl back, don't try to take her with, and then it's sure enough, they shouldn't have tried to take her. And it's I feel like he's one of the most masculine people in that, traditionally masculine people in that, in the group so far, aside from his shaking hand. And so it's he's masculine in all of the mental ways. And so it's I wonder how much of so far him not screwing up really all that much, how much that's just he has experience versus how much of it's he's a true man and is being rewarded for it.
That's a good question. I mean, part of it is he does. I would say he has a lot of experience, and they showed you that subtly. I don't know if you caught the Sergeant Horvath putting dirt in a canister. Did you see what the other canisters were labeled? They've been in every major American campaign in the war, right? It started in 1942, so they've been fighting for 2 years. Because he had Africa on his canister, and the U.S. landed in Algeria in November of 1942, and they weren't there that long. And then he had Italy, and the American invasion of Italy was summer of 1943, and now he's got France. He's in D-Day, so it's showing us subtly that these guys have been in combat for 2 years, but at the same time, the Germans they're fighting have been in combat for 4 years. They've been in combat twice as long. And because the Americans joined the war late, we always do. But yeah, why?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point because it kind of reminds me of the TV show Hogan's Heroes.
Did you guys all know what this TV show was? This god-awful atrocity of a TV show that I grew up on.
Oh, it's wonderful, though.
It's... I'll get to your point. I'll let you get your point. But Hogan's Heroes was this 1960s, 70s sitcom, and it was set in a German POW camp. And there was a whole group of American, French, British, etc. bomber crew pilots who had been shot down and were in prison camp, Stalag 13. And the commandant and the sergeant in the camp are complete buffoons. They're just utter idiots. And so the prisoners start running basically a French resistance cell out of the prison camp. They've got tunnels, they can get out anytime they want, and they go blow up bridges and stuff like that. And it's fascinating because it's a weird way of trying to process World War II. The Germans were a bunch of buffoons, and the Americans and French and British just ran circles around them, and but it's also. It's also deeply troubling. There's some really bad politics in it. It didn't help either that the star, Robert Crane, who was the highest-ranking American, Colonel Hogan's Heroes, turned out to be an absolute lunatic, sex perv, likes to rape women and film himself doing it, and he winds up getting beaten to death by a baseball bat by an angry husband or something. But what's really weird and screwed up about it is the guy who played Colonel Klink, the commandant of the prison camp, who was a buffoon. He's just an ineffective moron. he's the actual, Werner Klemperer was quite a left-wing activist, actually. So he's totally not a German Nazi guy, but he was German. And his brother, Victor Klemperer, was a major music scholar in Germany in the 20s and 30s. And he was Jewish, they're Jewish, and he survived World War II in Berlin because he was married to a non-Jewish woman, and he almost got deported several times to Auschwitz, but he didn't, and he kept a really lengthy diary of his entire time in Berlin. And he's a really smart guy, and it's really interesting sort of commenting on the way the Nazis use language and what's going on. But to have Victor Klemperer, who is so like almost a victim of the Nazi, I mean, his brother Werner Klemperer is like in America as an actor, playing the exact opposite of what he would have been in World War II. And then Colonel Hogan is played by Robert Crane, who Werner Klemperer once described as having politics just to the right of Genghis Khan. So Colonel Hogan is like the truth, justice, and the American way, but he's a total, basically a fascist himself. So it's a really bizarre show. All of which is say Wyatt has something really interesting to say about Hogan's Heroes.
Corporal LeBeau too was either in Auschwitz or Bergenthal, I believe.
Oh, was he?
I think so, because I remember reading
The actor who played him?
Yeah.
Huh. And then, of course, the British guy was Richard Dawson, who went on hosting Family Feud for decades, and had a kind of a creepy vibe because he liked women to kiss him way too much. But
it was the 60s. It's okay.
Yeah.
No, but I felt like the comment about the mental mentality there, the leadership role, it's not just about physical strength, but there's about this kind of problem solving. And I saw that if you watch Hogan's Heroes, there's always a way out of whatever horrible situation. It always comes up with it, and it's always him.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's kind of reflected with the captain too in this movie, where it's it's not just about physical, because his hand is getting jittery or whatever. There's that mental discord or disposition that allows them to always be on top of everything. And I think that also comes through his masculinity, because women can't function in this way, but they don't, they're not
according to the gender roles.
Right. And so I think that's just another leading factor.
A couple of poignant scenes that I was thinking about was first when the German soldiers were surrendering on D-Day and they were like, oh, please don't shoot or whatever, and he was like, oh, he said blah 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 something about food or whatever. He actually said that we're Hungarian, we were drafted, please don't shoot us.
Yeah.
And that's because the Nazis came through and drafted a bunch of people from the east and shipped them off to the Western Front to fight the Americans. And then the second scene was when they were digging around through the dog tags and weren't being very kind with how they were doing it, and having the entire wounded 101st watching them do it.
Yeah.
I think it was really important to show the violence of that act.
Oh, I'm sorry, you had your hand up earlier.
I thought two things kind of. Just it's very interesting that they're betting on where the captain's from. Like I'm trying to figure out what the significance of that is really, and I'm sure that it kind of plays into like how they're all from different places, and like I'm sure that will come back in later. But also,
I don't think I'm ruining it by saying Pennsylvania.
Okay.
It's Pennsylvania. Go ahead.
Is the tremor the captain has, is that like just supposed to be some of PTSD, or is that like is he developing like Huntington's or Parkinson's or something?
They don't explain it in the movie.
I don't know if he makes it far enough for that to come in.
I'll just say they don't explain it in the movie.
It's like I don't know what his fate is, if it's relevant or not.
I actually think that him not telling them anything about his past is connected to this idea in the film that you can have the full emotional life, you just have to lock that away, shut that off. And so if you start talking about home with your men or whatever, that leads to a sort of sentimentality that's dangerous because it'll get you killed. You've got to just sort of wall that off and do your thing. The one other thing I want you to keep in mind and sort of pay attention to is they've had a number of discussions about what they're doing, right? The mission, is this worth it? Is it worth getting maybe 8 people killed to save this one guy? And then Tom Hanks's response is, it's the mission, and we need to do it regardless of, in fact, the worse the mission it is, the more we need to just do it. And then he's later talking about how, every time he loses a guy, he just thinks, well, the mission had to be worth it. It would have saved lives there. I want you to keep track of that, because they have a few more conversations that are sort of along those lines, which are, I think, indicative of the kind of version of wartime heroism they're trying to build in this movie, because they are trying to build a vision of heroism. And I want to keep in mind that this is the Steven Spielberg generation, the Tom Brokaw, etc. These are the children, these are baby boomers who are the children of the World War II generation, okay? So their parents were the ones who were fighting the war, essentially. And all of this stuff in the 90s, looking back at the 50th anniversary of World War II, a lot of it was essentially celebrating their parents' generation for this wonderful sacrifice they made. And then some of it was, well, we're all saying World War II is the good war, but it was still a war and it sucked. Listen, did you ever hand
Yeah.
up?
I don't remember what else.
Listen, go ahead.
This is just a question about the read responses. Can you bring in readings from, could I bring in readings from last week?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. I did, and I just want to make sure that.
I'm mostly just looking for you guys to show me that you're really thinking about this. So,
I think this yesterday was the 80th anniversary of the D-Day. I didn't click till after class. I was like, oh.
yeah, we were watching it on
There's a movie that would have been nice to watch in this class called The Battle of Sevastopol, and it's a Russian-made film about a female sniper that fought in the Battle of Sevastopol. I watched it recently. It was pretty good. Very pro-war though, but it did dissect the gender norms and what she had to experience as a woman in the army.
If I ever teach this class again, I'll look at that. What was it? The
Battle of Sevastopol.
Battle of Sevastopol. Okay. Cool. The other thoughts? Did you have a Sydney?
Yeah, I was just thinking a lot about how the men interacted with each other and I don't remember the two characters, but specifically the two that would kiss at each other.
Yeah, that's Fish and the Vin Diesel character. What's his name? But anyway.
Italian.
Yeah, the Italian, the New York Italian.
I like that guy.
R.I.P.
Yeah, I don't know if they're not saying their names a lot or
Did he
anything.
die
What's
already?
going on, 'cause I feel like
Oh, yeah,
movies, I
no
get
shit.
the names fast. I don't know if it's just because they're all super famous actors, and I'm like, yes, Tom Hanks. That's just
Yes.
Tom Hanks.
We can just call him Tom
Yeah.
Hanks.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not
Caparzo,
getting
by the
names.
way, is the Italian
Yeah.
Caparzo.
I don't know why I'm not getting the names. It's just that's that guy.
Well, they often are shouting names in the middle of a battle or something, and you don't see who, what.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the justifications they use, because the sentimentality that he's using to save the girl is the same thing they're fighting for. It's just they have to set that aside. We can't use that now. That's what we're fighting for in general. And it is really kind of interesting. And they're trying to justify saving this one person as opposed to all these other people. And yet it's going through their heads this is kind of ridiculous, but then, we have a mission, and it's this really weird sort of dilemma, I feel like, when you have this power hierarchy of you're being given orders, but if you don't necessarily agree with the orders, but what do you do? And then you have to somehow justify it. And I don't know, it takes a sort of person to actually be in that position.
Part of the scene where he was talking about how they were having one guy to save all these guys, or having this many guys to save all these guys. That was very interesting because compared to I feel modern current ideas of heroic, so it's very much you can't trade lives. It has to be save everybody or save nobody. Which compared to the portrayal here, which is well, one guy died but he saved a bunch of others, so that's totally okay. We're all good with that. So I'm not.
Well, they're all basically doing the trolley problem here,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But yeah, the one other thing that's kind of interesting here, and I think they do a good job on this, is clearly the American soldiers at D-Day knew that the Nazis were anti-Semitic. I mean, Fish, the character, is Jewish, is rubbing it in all the German POW faces, right? But none of them knew about the Holocaust. In 1944, that was not general knowledge. The American government knew about it, the British government knew about it, but they had not publicized this. And the knowledge of those camps in Germany would only come out in 1945, a year later, when the camps were liberated. And so people sort of had an idea the Nazis were doing bad things over there, but they didn't know about Auschwitz, they didn't know about the camps, they didn't know about 6 million Jews, etc. Because it would have made Tom Hanks's moral calculation a whole lot easier if he's like, I've lost 96 guys, but we're saving 6 million, or millions more. But they don't know about it. So
I thought that people kind of had generally it's like bad, but like nobody knew the specifics. Was okay.
Yeah, so they knew something bad was happening. It was obvious that the Nazis hated Jews, and they now had a lot of Jews that they could do bad things to, but nobody really knew what was going on. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Lots of people knew what was going on, but it was kept secret by the governments that knew that, and the general public and the soldiers in the U.S. Army had no idea what was going on.
What was that one ship?
Oh, the St. Louis.
Yeah, the St. Louis. I
Yeah.
learned a lot about that in school.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing was publicized, but the death camps weren't. I mean, they just had no idea.
What was like the justification for keeping that a secret from like the public?
Well, little backstory. The Polish resistance realized the death camps were set up in late 1941, early 1942 after the invasion of the Soviet Union. And just to make it real brief story here, the Nazis had concentration camps, which were labor camps where people were worked really hard, and lots of people died in those camps. The guards could beat people to death, they starved them to death, disease was rampant. It was not a good place to survive. Those camps were around from 1933 onward in Germany. But in 1941, they invaded Poland, and then they invaded Poland in 39, and then the Soviet Union in 41. And when they invaded the Soviet Union, the Nazis adopted a new strategy, which was to kill all the Jews in Europe. They decided they had tried other plans before. They were going to send them to Madagascar. They were going to send them over to Siberia. They finally decided, no, the plan is now just kill them all. And the first part of the plan was to shoot them all. So they sent death squads around Poland and Ukraine, etc., to just go village to village and shoot all the Jews. And they did that. They killed about 1 million people that way, shooting village by village, just shoot everybody. But in late 1941, early 42, they started building death camps, which were camps that were intended solely to kill people as fast as possible. So these are different than the labor camps where they would put people to work and give them uniforms and tattoo their arms and put them to work and maybe work them to death, but they were going to be there a while. They had barracks, etc. The death camps had gas chambers and were set up to kill people as fast as possible. They were factories of death. And so 2 of the death camps were attached to labor camps, concentration camps. So Auschwitz, there was a concentration camp that had people working to death, and then there were the gas chambers that were just killing people as fast as possible. Majdanek also was like that. But there were 4 other ones that were just a barbed wire enclosure with a building or 2, a gas chamber and a crematorium and a train siding. And there was like 40 guards there, and they would just load them off the train into the gas chamber, bury them, and run them through a crematorium or bury them in mass graves in the woods. And that's all it did. That was the whole camp, that was it. So they obviously don't know about, they probably had some inkling that the Nazis had concentration camps. That wasn't a big secret. But the reason, to answer your question, in 1942, the Polish resistance found out about Auschwitz, and they smuggled a Polish army officer, captain, in there who took a bunch of notes about Auschwitz, and then they smuggled him back out. And he went to the British government and said, they've got a death camp going, they're killing people in gas chambers, this place is horrific. And the Americans found out from the British, so from mid-42 onward, the British and the Americans knew that Auschwitz was there and that lots of people were dying there. And there was a lot of argument in the U.S. government. I don't know about the British government. The argument in the U.S. government, and I think the British argument is the same, but I don't know. The argument in the U.S. government was, okay, suppose we send bombers to blow up the train tracks going into Auschwitz, which they couldn't do in 42. They didn't have bombers that could go that far, but and get back. But they said, suppose we do that, it might stop the camp's operation for a little bit, but they're going to fix the railroad tracks and they're going to do it again, and we could bomb the camp, but we're killing the inmates of the camp by bombing the camp. And they basically used justification, and you don't have to agree with it, but their justification was it would be a better use of our resources to bomb the Germans and end the war ending the war is what's going to stop the death camps. Bombing the death camps is just a temporary reprieve, so we should really put all of our resources into that. And they did not, I mean, very late in the war they did bomb Auschwitz, but not much. And so they essentially made the decision not to. And because they weren't doing anything about it, they didn't want to let the public know what was going on. So, listen.
So how the death camps more effective, like more efficient for the Nazis to just kill people than random shootings? Because
Shootings are slow. They took the death squads in Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, etc., about 3 years to kill 1 million people. Auschwitz could kill 20,000 a day in their 2 main gas chambers. You could pack 150 people in a gas chamber, kill them in 10 minutes. And it just took so much longer to dig a mass grave, bring everybody out there in an orderly fashion, shoot them all, bury cover the grave up again, go locate another village, etc. It was slow. It was much easier to say, take all the Jews from Berlin and put them on trains and send them to Auschwitz, and as soon as they get off the train, they're going right into the gas chambers and they're dead within half an hour when they got off the train, and you burn the bodies with a crematorium right there, and it's an assembly line of death is what it is. The other thing is that they discovered very quickly that the soldiers who were shooting men, women, children, and old people had serious psychological difficulties from doing that, and the alcohol consumption amongst the death squads skyrocketed, and they began to, the most troubling thing was that the Aryan supermen, the Germans who were supposed to be the superior race, often became murderous sadists. They started to actually go out of their way to brain children before they shot them, and so the Nazis got really disturbed that it was, I know this sounds weird, but the Nazis were worried they were turning into monsters. Not because they were killing all the Jews, but because the trauma of shooting them face to face was too much for the shooters to handle.
So when I visited Germany when I was younger, we went to Dachau. I'm a big fan of history, so we were looking at castles in the area. I was surprised at how small it actually was. The barracks themselves were extremely tight. Beds stacked on top of beds, stacked on top of beds, and maybe about as big as this classroom. And it would hold 60, 70 people.
Yeah.
And walking the streets or walking the lanes, it was really surprising how small it was and how compact and how many people were pushed through that system. And to the point where the graveyard was massive behind it, and going to where they still had the furnaces, you could feel the weights of death in there, and it was pretty wild.
Dachau was the first camp that was built. It was actually started when Hitler won the election, or was named chancellor at the end of January 1933. He had these paratroopers, paramilitary guys, the brown shirts, SA, the Sturm title. Those are the guys with the brown uniforms with the red armbands and the black pants. You've seen. They were basically street thugs. Most of the previous 10 years they had been having street fights with communists, and they basically saw Hitler's being named chancellor as their open season. And they just started grabbing people off the streets that they didn't like and beating them up, and they would haul them into abandoned factories. And then they started to turn abandoned factories into basically impromptu prison camps. They would chain people up and they would beat them regularly and keep them there for a week or two. Initially, they would dump people back in the street, minus a bunch of teeth with some broken ribs, etc. And then later they just started killing them. The German government under Hitler finally realized they had to do something about this, so they actually turned. Dachau was originally an abandoned factory outside of Munich that was turned into a impromptu camp by the SA. The German government just formalized it and put the SA in charge of a labor camp. So Dachau was the oldest, it was the earliest. It was never a death camp in the sense that Auschwitz was, built to kill 20,000 people a day, etc. Dachau at several points had gas chambers, but they usually dismantled it for various reasons, and it was not a death camp. So the big cemetery was people who died of disease, died by being beaten to death by guards, or were executed for breaking the rules, or whatever. But it wasn't, a death camp in that sense. Dachau was horrific. I don't want to soft pedal it, but but it was not a death camp. They did have temporary gas chambers for a little while,
Yeah.
and they had crematoria, but because they had a high death rate.
I
But
don't know if they matched what the work will set you free line that was above Auschwitz, but
Yeah.
that was also above the gates of Dachau.
yeah,